Jupiter Ascending is a sci-fi movie made by the makers of The Matrix, starring Channing Tatum, Mila Kunis, and Eddie Redmayne. It's got everything it needs to be a spectacular sci-fi movie, and yet it's possibly the worst movie ever. Let's talk about why.
Worst movie ever!
The Jupiter Ascending has a bad reputation anyway, so I don't think it'll be a surprise to many people that's on my list of contenders for the worst movie ever. If you didn't know, this is Worst Movie Ever, the show where we look for the worst movie ever. It's kind of self-explanatory at this point. We have a lot of contenders. If you haven't caught up so far, there's a playlist right up here for you to check out. And as usual, here on the Worst Movie Ever, we run down the story, we talk a little bit about it, and I'll leave it up to you guys to decide which is the worst movie ever. Although at some point in the future, we will get to a point where you have enough people watching where we can do a poll and you guys can actually decide the worst movie ever, but that's in the future, at some point. So I didn't know too much about Jupiter Ascending before I watched it. I knew the cast, I knew it was a sci-fi movie, I knew it had a bad reputation, and that's about all. I even forgot that the Wachowskis made it. So my expectations going into the movie weren't very high, and I gotta say, right from the start of this movie, I was left going, what the hell's happening? There's far too much happens within the opening 15-20 minutes. In fact, I had to start making notes just to keep up. One thing that was very evident right from the start is the dialogue in the movie is absolutely atrocious. The acting and performances they get from some people in the movie is terrible right from the beginning. The line delivery is terrible, and the audio mixing is horrendous. At times you can't even hear characters because the music is too high and their weird accents make their voices really low. Eddie Redmayne in particular is very hard to understand at certain points in this movie. Kind of ironic coming from me, I'm sure. So let's jump into the story, because here's what happens in the first 15 minutes. I'm going to read through my notes on this because there's a lot to go through. So in the first 15 minutes of this movie, we meet Jupiter's parents. They establish who her parents are, how they fell in love. The father was obsessed with space. The mother was pregnant at some point. And then they get, I guess, just random people burst into their house and try to steal from them and end up killing the father. The mother then is left alone. She pushes everyone away. She gives birth on a boat for some unexplained reason. She's on a boat. She gives birth in the middle of the Atlantic, Mila Kunis says. So she's born with no home, no country, that sort of thing. Then we jump forward years later to where Jupiter, played by Mila Kunis, is now much older and she's working with her mother as a house cleaner or a maid. She's cleaning toilets and she says multiple times that she hates her life. Then we shoot to another planet where we see Eddie Redmayne and two other people, and there's no explanation really of who they are. They could be gods, they could just be random aliens, they could just be people. It turns out they're just people who own planets. They're siblings. They clearly don't like each other. They have a little bit of disdain for each other. Eddie Redmayne is like the main guy and the others are trying to get what he has. But there's a little bit of establishing of who they are, but not really much. It's not explained very well. We see this other world. We see a sci-fi world, but there's no name on it. There's no explanation of where it is other than clearly this isn't Earth. But Mila Kunis was on Earth. So that's a thing. Then we shoot to another scene with Channing Tatum, and he's ominously walking down a laneway, comes to a building. People are watching him. Bounty hunters are watching him, I should say. He goes into this building, goes through a file cabinet, finds a piece of paper, and sniffs the piece of paper. Because that's a normal thing to do. But this leads to Channing Tatum fighting the bounty hunters with some pretty decent visuals. But this was a fairly big budget movie and the Wachowskis were involved. The sci-fi elements should be decent. Ultimately, Channing Tatum escapes after the big battle scene. And then we cut to a scene where Eddie Redmayne's sister is plotting with this other weird looking guy on a different planet that we haven't seen before and it's not explained either. She's clearly plotting against Eddie Redmayne's character. And then we cut to another scene because don't forget, this is all happening within the first 15 minutes. This isn't the whole movie, this is the first 15 minutes. Then we suddenly see a big ship coming through space. It looks pretty cool. Some of the sci-fi elements, as I've mentioned, look really cool in the movie. Some of the visuals are pretty spectacular. But next up, we see some winged lizard people. They come and talk to Eddie Redmayne and say that they found the girl that they're looking for on Earth, Catherine Dunleavy. I believe that's who they're looking for. That's who they think they're looking for. They're going to go look for Catherine Dunleavy. Now we cut to a scene where it turns out that's Mila Kunis's or Jupiter's friend. Oh yeah, Eddie Redmayne also put a hit out on her because they want to kill her. Because unexplained reasons so far. And that's around the 15-minute mark. All that stuff I've mentioned so far, that all happens within the first 15 minutes. It's super high paced. In fact, too high-paced, a perfect example of when a movie is paced too quickly, there's too much going on, and there's just too much to wrap your head around in the opening 15 minutes. Continuing on though to the 20-minute mark, Jupiter's friend, Catherine Dunleavy, is then attacked by weird translucent aliens, little guys. It's kind of weird, but Mila Kunis just happens to be in the room when this is happening, off to the side. She takes a picture of the guys. It's looking kind of weird the way they like flip her over and everything. It's getting a bit, a little bit strange. Mila Kunis' phone then rings. That alerts the aliens. They all jump at Mila Kunis. It looks like she's been attacked or taken over by something, but apparently we find out later on her memory was just wiped. But continuing on with the ridiculousness of how quickly the story is moving at this point, we then cut to a different scene where we see that Mila Kunis has this big extended family. There's a lot of family issues, a lot of tension amongst the family, a lot of anger in the room. And then, of course, we skip to something else where Mila Kunis is sitting at a computer looking at a picture of a telescope on eBay. This is where a random guy who we haven't been introduced to at all at this point just comes in and starts talking to Mila Kunis. We kind of just have to assume they're related because it's just after the family scene. He's convincing Mila Kunis to sell her eggs to make money. They're going to make $15,000. He's going to get $10,000. She's going to get $5,000. Around enough to buy that telescope she's looking at. So Mila Kunis goes to the clinic to sell her eggs and she uses the name Catherine Dunleavy. So she goes into the room, she's been put on the table, she's had the gas and everything, the operation's about to begin, and it turns out the doctors are the aliens. But she didn't see that coming. Yeah. So the doctors do some tests to confirm it actually is the person they're looking for, even though she's not actually Catherine Dunleavy, she's Jupiter, but it turns out they were looking for Jupiter anyway, not Catherine Dunleavy. I don't know what happened there. They never really explained that. They were never really after Catherine Dunleavy. I guess you kind of just have to put it together. So they try to kill her and Channing Tatum comes to save the day. And that's not the last time I will say that in this video. It happens a lot. But that's where the 20-minute mark hits. Around the 20-minute mark is there. All that stuff happens. I could go through it again, but we'd be here a while. So much stuff happens in the first 20 minutes, just far too much to wrap your head around. And I'm sure a lot of people would turn the movie off at this point. I really wanted to. The movie's over 2 hours long. I think it's almost 2.5 hours long. And it was a tough watch. Then we start getting action sequences with Channing Tatum flying ships and the aliens shooting after him and ships crashing together, buildings being blown up, but it's all super shaky, super jumpy, super badly shot and difficult to follow. In fact, I'm sure a lot of people get dizzy and get headaches just watching some of these action scenes. They're so jumpy and jittery and so difficult to watch. So Jupiter and Channing Tatum ultimately get away from the aliens. They head to Sean Bean's house. As we're introduced to Sean Bean and some other girl who is very irrelevant. She just disappears at some point. But it turns out Mila Kunis can like control bees.
No, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah!
Or bees respond to her because they realize she's royalty. Then they start calling her Her Majesty from this point on. But after a couple of over-the-top explanations from Sean Bean, which again are difficult to understand because the music is swelling and the voice is hard to hear, bounty hunters turn up around the 40 to 50 minute mark. And after a long battle scene, ultimately 2 of the bounty hunters escape with Mila Kunis. But Channing Tatum is right on their tail. He's like hanging onto the back of their ship. These bounty hunters end up going to another planet and they end up handing Mila Kunis or Jupiter over to the guy we previously saw plotting with Eddie Redmayne's sister in the movie. Because remember that happened like, it felt about 4 hours ago, but it was actually only like 5 minutes into the movie. That. And I forgot to mention, when Channing Tatum saved Jupiter earlier in the movie, he brought her to like a safe house. But when he found her, she was on a doctor's table with like the dressing gown on, the doctor's robe thingy on, the clinical robe, what are they called? Hospital clothes. But when she wakes up, she's fully clothed and she even makes a point of like, you dressed me, that's kind of weird. But when she goes to this other planet and she's given off by the bounty hunters to the other people, she's unconscious, but she wakes up in a room and again she's being redressed. Twice in this movie, Mila Kunis' character is dressed by other people when she's unconscious. And there's a clear point made of it in the movie. Even the filmmakers and the writer knew it was weird, but they keep putting it in it and keep making reference to it. Really weird. But this is where Jupiter finally meets one of the weird 3 gods or people from the start of the movie, Eddie Redmayne's people. Him, his brother, and his sister. She meets Kalik, which is Eddie Redmayne's sister in the movie. This is where Kalik tells Jupiter that Jupiter is Kalik's mother. Basically, she shows Jupiter a statue, which very sparingly looks like Mila Kunis. And she tells her, you're a reincarnation, you're a perfect reincarnation of our mother, who died after living for 91 millennium. But skipping forward, Khalik then takes Jupiter to a place like a pool, and Khalik walks into it, they do some button pressing, and she comes out, she's younger all of a sudden. She looks younger. This is where she tells Jupiter they have technology to de-age, to keep themselves looking young, keep themselves looking perfect. She tells Jupiter time is the most valuable commodity in the universe. And it's this point here where it's very clear that what they're doing is harvesting humans from Earth to make this serum that's keeping them young. I got it in my notes right here at this point in the movie. This is where I said, this is what they're doing. They're harvesting humans to make this serum to keep them young. Clearly, they're the bad guys here. So along comes Channing Tatum to save the day, and he gets her away from Khalik, who just gives her away basically. And that's pretty much the last time we see Khalik in the movie then. But Channing Tatum takes her to his ship with Sean Bean on it and other people, and she goes to meet people and she goes, oh, call me Jupe. She hasn't said that to anyone else at this point in the movie. She just randomly decides, oh, I'll just shorten my name now because why not? It's a minor thing, but it just seemed rather stupid in the movie, just randomly throw it out there. And no one in the movie beyond that point calls her Jupe. So it's kind of weird. They just randomly go, call me Jupe, and then no one calls her Jupe. Why put it in there? Why? So an hour goes by, and it felt like about 6 hours, and I was really falling asleep at this point in the movie. But Mila Kunis finally gets to dress herself, and then Channing Tatum comes into her room, and they start talking. And then Jupiter turns to Channing Tatum, and they start talking about how she's royalty, and then all of a sudden she starts telling Channing Tatum how she's falling for him. At this point, she met Channing Tatum yesterday in a movie. It's been like a day, and she's like, I'm falling for you. They've had like 3 interactions, she's like, I'm falling for you. What do I do about that? And he's like, no, you're royalty, I'm not royalty, that can't happen. Just because. So how do you fix this issue where there's this budding romance where one person says yes, one person says no? Bureaucracy. That's what you do. You bring in the paperwork. Because at 103, this is where they go to a weird scene with this robot-looking guy who comes in, who's going to help Mila Kunis reclaim her title as like the owner of Earth or the queen of something. Basically, they have to go through a place like a DMV, like a government department, fill out loads of paper, go to different departments, get pushed around a lot. It's really funny if you've no sense of humor and you think that shit is funny. But this scene lasts about 5-10 minutes and it's really stupid. But ultimately, Mila Kunis gets this weird tattoo, glowy tattoo, which signifies that she's now the owner of Earth somehow. But once that's all done, Mila Kunis and Channing Tatum are walking down the road again. She's making jokes about how I'll never complain about the DMV again. And then her and Channing Tatum have another heart-to-heart moment, even though the last one was about 5 minutes ago. But this is the point where he says to her, I just want to be back in the Legion. That's why we lied to you, me and Sean Bean. Then Sean Bean turns up and he has betrayed Channing Tatum and sold Mila Kunis to someone else. So ultimately, Mila Kunis is taken again and she's going off to meet someone else. This time, she's being brought to Titus, who is Eddie Redmayne's brother in the movie. So this is the second trial or tribulation, I guess, of Jupiter. So we meet Titus around 1 hour and 10 minutes into the movie. It's felt like a long time, as I mentioned. So Titus shockingly reveals to Jupiter that her siblings are evil. They're bad. They're bad. He's good. That's his whole point. He further explains the serum thing to Mila Kunis, who finally realizes that what they're doing is they're using Earth as a farm to harvest 100 people for each of these serum things they use to keep themselves young. And Mila is shocked, despite being told this basically just beforehand. Then Titus does the only logical thing he can think of next. He proposes to Jupiter. Now, I'll remind you that when he met Khalik, who is Titus's sister, Khalik informed Jupiter that Jupiter was Khalik's mother. Therefore, Jupiter would also be Titus's mother, yet Titus proposes to her. So effectively, Titus proposed to his own mother, which is all sorts of wrong. All sorts of wrong. But a minute later, Titus now has Channing Tatum in an airlock thing. He's going to kick him out to space. But of course, before he does that, he has to reveal his big evil plan to Channing Tatum in a James Bond villain-esque type of thing. So he kicks Channing Tatum out right after revealing he's going to kill Mila Kunis after he marries her. So Channing Tatum's out in space. Ultimately, he's saved by his ship. Sean Bean is now helping his team again because he was only betraying him for like a minute just for a second. There's a big wedding happening. Mila Kunis has this big, pretty amazing looking dress, amazing looking scene. Some of the scenes in the movie, as I mentioned, look really, really good. We end up with a point where the wedding is happening. Mila Kunis is about to get a ring on her finger, like digitally put on through lasers instead of just using actual rings. But Channing Tatum and Sean Bean are fighting through an army of robots in space to get to them. That sounds very exciting, but it wasn't. Ultimately, Channing Tatum crashes through the building and saves the day right at the last moment. This movie really could have been called Channing Tatum Saves the Day. But Channing Tatum gets to the altar using his rocket boots he's had throughout the movie. And once he gets there, Titus is just kind of like, drats, Scooby-Doo style. He's like, you foiled me. Because Mila Kunis goes, I'm not going to marry you now. And he goes, I was going to kill you. And he just gives up. And then Channing Tatum's just like, I'm taking her now. And he's like, okay. So Khalik just let her go. And then Titus, when his plan failed, he's just, I'll let her go as well. Because why not? But now Mila Kunis has gotten through those two. And she just wants to go home. After a minor argument with Channing Tatum, because he basically told her, I'm only with you so that you'll make me a legion again. She's like, you don't like me, so fuck you, I want to go home. When they go home, they find that Eddie Redmayne has taken her family, her actual family from earlier in the movie. And the only way she's going to get them back is if she agrees to go to see Eddie Redmayne. And ultimately, she has to go alone. So she ends up alone, facing Eddie Redmayne, and Channing Tatum ends up on a ship staring at the planet Jupiter, because they can't get down to the city because they don't have the portal to do that. For some reason. So when Eddie Redmayne and Jupiter finally have their face off, Eddie Redmayne tells Jupiter that humans are a living resource just waiting to be turned into capital. It's all about profit. It's all about money. That's why they're harvesting these planets, Earth being the most valuable of them all. Eddie Redmayne's big evil plan then is that he's forcing Jupiter to relinquish her title to him in order to save her family, which is her situated in a room below them with like a see-through floor so she can see they're about to be tortured unless she does what Eddie Redmayne wants. But just as she's about to sign it over, we see that Channing Tatum is on his way to save the day, as he does. As he's done multiple times in the movie at this point. However, at this point, Jupiter has a revelation. She realizes that Eddie Redmayne is going to harvest Earth as soon as he gets that title. So regardless, her family will be destroyed. She just wouldn't know about it if she gave over the title, because their minds would be wiped and they wouldn't know anything about it. So it's at this point where Channing Tatum bursts in and saves the day. He's going to save Jupiter's family, and this provides a distraction for Jupiter to kick Eddie Redmayne in the nuts, and the big fight starts, and ultimately we start the end battle. We then end up at a point where Channing Tatum is fighting a big flying lizard, because why not? They have to make use of them to put them in the movie, so why not? And Mila Kunis is fighting Eddie Redmayne. And ultimately, Channing Tatum wins, Mila Kunis wins, good guys win. Mila Kunis then falls off a building, and the amount of times Mila Kunis falls off buildings and it's just free falling, going is ridiculous in this movie. It must happen 5, 6, maybe even 7 times. And always Channing Tatum comes along and saves the day with his rocket boots. So we cut back to Mila Kunis' family after all of that. They've been mind wiped. They don't remember being taken by these aliens or the alien abduction happening. And Mila Kunis is back to cleaning toilets, despite being the owner of Earth. She owns the Earth. Somehow. But then she reveals to her family after they buy her the telescope she wanted. They remember that, but they don't remember all the alien stuff. They remember the whole thing with the eggs. Kind of weird. But ultimately she says she has a date. She goes and sees Channing Tatum, and he for some reason now has wings. And then Mila Kunis has rocket boots, and she can use the rocket boots. And then the movie ends, and that was a long time, like 40 hours of my life I'm never getting back. At least it felt like 40 hours. I think it was only 2 hours, but